Leading our discussion this morning and opening our program is Sarah Torrey, Policy Analyst in the Richard and Helen DeVos Center for Religion and Civil Society. She focuses on policy issues related to marriage, family, and religious liberty. She posts about them regularly on the Heritage homepage and also directs and reads through data and research at our think tank's familyfacts.org website. Her work has been cited in numerous publications, and her commentary has appeared on major newspapers and in digital journals. She also speaks to student groups, a very important target audience, and other audiences here on Capitol Hill. Prior to joining our organization permanently, Ms. Torrey was also an education intern here at Heritage. Please join me in welcoming Sarah Torrey. Sarah?
Thanks, John, and thank you all for being here this afternoon. And a special thanks to Catherine Lopez and the National Review Institute for co-hosting this event with us today. Later this week, hundreds of thousands of Americans will come to D.C., not too far from here, to participate in the 42nd Annual March for Life. The theme of the march this year is Every Life is a Gift, focusing specifically on the dignity of preborn children who are given a poor prenatal diagnosis. Our discussion today will dovetail with that larger conversation this week as we look at some of the medical advances, support systems, and public policies meant to help more parents choose life after an unexpected diagnosis. Every year, thousands of parents face the devastating news that their unborn son or daughter could suffer from a serious disability or even fatal condition. Regrettably, many children diagnosed with Down syndrome, trisomy 18, trisomy 13, spina bifida, and other fatal and non-fatal conditions are more often aborted than carried to term. Studies suggest children given a poor prenatal diagnosis are aborted at rates of 60 to even 90%. Often, parents are given a long list of the things their unborn child might not be able to do, or the physical and health setbacks they may suffer. Too few hear the stories of hope and joy that come from children who were given the chance to live a flourishing and happy life, despite physical challenges. And too few parents are readily connected with compassionate support to help them love and care for their child, however long or short her life may be. We'll have the chance to hear about some of those hopeful and life-affirming options available to parents as our expert panel explores the medical advances in caring for Down syndrome and other conditions, of the many physical and emotional resources for parents of children living with disabilities, and what policymakers, especially in the states throughout the country, can do to better inform parents receiving an unexpected diagnosis. As we prepare for the March for Life later this week, we reflect on the Supreme Court's 1973 decision in Roe v. Wade. That decision invented a right to abortion and excluded the youngest and most vulnerable children in our society from the right to life. We hope our conversation today and throughout this week will challenge more Americans to recognize the truth, that every human from the moment of conception is a person with inherent value and dignity, regardless of their dependency, ability, or life expectancy. To begin our discussion today, we're delighted to have with us Carly Fiorina. She is currently president of Fiorina Enterprises and chairman of Good 360, the world's largest product philanthropy organization, as well as chairman of Opportunity International, a Christian-based organization that lifts millions out of poverty through microfinance. Previously, she served for 6 years as president and CEO of Hewlett-Packard, becoming the first woman to lead a Fortune 50 company. She holds degrees from Stanford University and MIT's Sloan School of Management, as well as an MBA from the University of Maryland. Please join me in welcoming Carly Fiorina.
Thank you and good afternoon. It's a real pleasure to be with you this afternoon and speaking on this very important topic. I'd like to begin with a story, if I may. When I graduated from high school, I went to work as a volunteer teacher in a school for special needs children. Many of these children had Down syndrome. All of them faced some type of mental or physical challenge. And every morning I saw the struggle on these children's parents' faces as they dropped their children off for another day of school. Many of these parents struggled just to make ends meet, much less to care for a child with special needs. I also saw at the end of every day when these same mothers and fathers came to pick up their children, I also saw the joy in their face as their children excitedly told them about whatever the small triumph was they had achieved that day. I remember in particular a young boy named Kenneth. He was an African-American boy. His parents struggled mightily to make ends meet every day. And Kenneth had many challenges. I spent over a month teaching Kenneth the difference between his eyes and his ears, what his eyes did, what his ears did, and how to say eye and ear. And I remember to this day the look of absolute joy and triumph on Kenneth's face when he finally mastered the ability to say I, E. Many months later, after I completed my first semester of college at Stanford, I returned to that school. And as I walked from my car in the parking lot to the playground of the school, Kenneth was playing on the jungle gym. And he saw me, and he climbed down from the jungle gym and ran towards me. And when he reached me, he said, I, E, with that same look of triumph. That was a moment of joy and grace that Kenneth gave me. Many years later, I met my husband, and when we were married, I came to learn that his mother had been told when she carried him that an abortion was her only choice. Her doctors feared for her life. But she was a woman of deep faith and great courage, and she chose to carry her son to term. She spent almost a year in the hospital following his birth. But her son, my husband, was the joy of her life, and for over 30 years he has been the rock of mine. In 2010, when I was running in California for the U.S. Senate against Barbara Boxer, I won the Republican primary and was visiting with a donor. And this gentleman said to me, well, now that you've won the primary and you're in the general, you're, of course, going to modify your more extreme positions. I mean, you can't possibly really be pro-life. After all, you're an MIT and a Stanford graduate. The irony of that statement, of course, is that science is helping those of us who believe in the sanctity of life to make our case every day. Science is why more and more young people are becoming pro-life. We know, for example, that the DNA that is present in a zygote is precisely the same DNA that each person possesses at the moment of their death. We know that in utero surgeries on unborn children as young as 19 weeks have been going on for a very long time, since 1997. This isn't at the fringe of science. If a successful in utero surgery can be performed on an unborn child as young as 19 weeks to tackle the challenge of spinal bifida, sounds like a life to me. We know now that a life in utero dreams and can feel pain after 5 months. When I was 8 years old, my mother gave me a little plaque in Sunday school. She was my Sunday school teacher at that time, and the plaque read, "What you are is God's gift to you. What you make of yourself is your gift to God." And I have learned over the course of my life that every person has potential, that everyone has God-given gifts. And in truth, most people have far more potential than they realize. I've also learned something about leadership. Leadership differs fundamentally from management. Management is the production of acceptable results within known constraints and conditions, whereas leadership is to change those constraints and conditions. Leadership is the act of changing the order of things. And therefore, the highest calling of leadership is to unlock potential in others. Leadership has nothing to do with position or title or power or perks. The only way the order of things is changed is to tap potential in others. And so this, indeed, is leadership's highest calling, to unlock potential in others. My husband, that unborn child who almost did not have a chance, my husband has supported me in every step of my journey. And I think often of how different my life would be if my mother-in-law had chosen a different path. A woman who is pregnant and who hears a devastating prenatal diagnosis deserves our profound empathy and our deepest support, never our judgment or our condemnation. She knows that she faces great difficulty and great struggle, as does the father of the child. But truly, who are we to judge which life is better than another? And none of us can predict the future or predict the struggles that we will face. I know this having watched our younger daughter consumed by the demons of addiction, which ultimately took her life. And I also know through that struggle, through my own struggle with cancer, I also know that sometimes the times of greatest challenge can also bring the greatest blessings. I know that life is not measured in time or IQ or wealth. Life is measured in love and moments of joy and grace and positive contribution. And for me, Kenneth provided moments of joy and grace and a positive contribution to my life, and I know to his parents' lives as well. On these most profound questions of life and life's meaning, frankly, I find the Democrats' party platform and liberal talking points to be extreme, hypocritical, and inconsistent. Rather than acknowledge the preponderance of scientific evidence and public opinion, some Democrats continue to aggressively defend abortion for any reason at any point in a pregnancy. Barbara Boxer, my opponent in the 2010 Senate election, Barbara Boxer famously declared that a life isn't a life until it leaves the hospital. New York legislators have been fighting mightily to allow this right for an abortion at any reason, at any point in a woman's pregnancy. Now they want this right to be extended so that a woman can have it performed by a non-doctor. Abortion clinics remain less regulated than tattoo parlors. The majority of women believe, for example, that abortion after 5 months is extreme. The majority of men and women believe that sex selection abortion is wrong, and yet liberals will not yield an inch on any of these questions. Presumably, they will not yield because they are afraid to contemplate the question, when does life begin? A question you will recall President Obama famously said was above his pay grade. The hypocrisy of liberal positions is astounding to me, actually. I have lived for more than a decade in the state of California, and there, lives and livelihoods have been routinely destroyed because of the extreme lengths to which liberals have gone to protect the lives of fish, of frogs, and indeed, yes, even of flies. Liberals may not know when life begins, but surely even they would argue that a human life is worth more than a fly's. Over the next few days in Washington, we will celebrate life and those who seek to protect it. We gather here in Washington for the 42nd year, not because we are stupid, or because we are extreme, or because we are uncaring. We gather here because we know that women and their unborn children deserve our respect, they deserve our empathy, and they deserve our support. We gather here because we know that the life we save may make all the difference in the lives of others. We gather here because we know that no one of us is any better than any other one of us. We gather here because we know that every human life has potential and every human life is precious. Thank you so very much. And I am happy to take a few questions if there are any. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, I'm Penny Starr with CNS News. Thank you for taking my question. Can you talk about the words that pro-abortion people use is anti-choice and taking away women's rights? Can you talk about women's rights in the context of protecting the unborn and the women from the, I guess, scars of abortion? Thank you.
So I very much liked the way you framed the question, pro-abortion. And you know, I referenced very briefly in my remarks this push by liberal New York legislators to allow abortions to be performed by non-doctors. What's interesting about that is that it was cloaked in a bill that was described as the Women's Equality Act, which is sort of stunning when you think about it. Really? Who are we protecting? Whose equality are we protecting when a woman can seek an abortion at 7, 8, or 9 months by a non-doctor, which is inhumane to both mother and child? I also know the scars of abortion on women. I can remember being probably 23 years old and accompanying a very good friend of mine here in DC as she went off to get an abortion and watched the physical scars of that experience on her, and more especially the emotional trauma that I'm not sure she ever recovered from. And who can forget the heartbreaking story of the young woman who died at the hands of Dr. Gosnell, who did not want an abortion but was convinced by others, among them, I believe, in retrospect, her mother, trying to tell her that she was not capable of raising a child on her own. And so she went off and had an abortion at 6 months and died in a hideous fashion. The truth is, I think, most women know the life they carry within them is precious. And so that is why they deserve our empathy, our support, our caring as they make a difficult choice to preserve the life that they bear. Yes?
My name is Barbara Dello, and first I want to make a very quick comment. I both am a mother of a child with a disability, was for many years, and I'm also a nurse who worked with people with disabilities. And I have to comment, you know, you hear so many people say, I wouldn't want to live like that. And I have to comment that when you look from the outside at someone with a disability, you see the wheelchair, you see the disability. But when you spend time with someone with a disability, you see the person. And I just have to share that with you because I cherished every moment with my son, and he cherished life. He graduated from Stevens Institute of Technology with his oxygen by his side. So please don't think, as Judge Rehnquist wrote in the New York State Court opinion, that a disabled life is a less worthy life or a less loved life. And then my question is, what can we do to combat the really enormous push of misinformation to really a whole generation of people who have heard so much powerful language that diminishes life?
So I find it very, first of all, thank you for your comments about those that you have worked with and your own son, because I think those kinds of experiences and comments are one of the most powerful tools we have to talk in human terms about people's lives and the contribution they can make to others' lives. Second, I would say that I find it actually very encouraging that young people are actually, by virtue, we see this in all of the polls, young people are becoming more and more pro-life. And I think that is a reflection not only of their familiarity with the science, which continues to evolve and continues to inform us more and more, but also because they experience lives of people who are different than they are, who perhaps have struggles that they don't share, but whom they interact with. And I think all of those things make a difference. And so what I think we need to do is, first, continue to tell the stories of both mothers and their children in human terms. Secondly, to make sure that people are well aware of the science as it continues to progress. And third, to push back on the extremism of the pro-abortion lobby, because it is they who are extreme. If you look at the Democrats' party platform, it is an extreme statement. Any abortion, any time, for any reason. This is extremism, and we cannot be afraid to call it what it is, and to ask them the tough questions. I think I am followed by a very august panel, so I will thank you very much for your time and your questions, and look forward to the panel that's just about to convene. Thanks so very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Carly, for those excellent remarks. It's a great way to start off our panel. I'll ask Catherine Lopez and our other panelists to join me up here on the stage. We have a number of experts who are working on medical research, who actually daily help families with children with multiple disabilities, and are working on some policies to help further allow parents to choose life for their child, even in the midst of very painful and heartbreaking situations. So I will turn it over now to Catherine to lead this panel discussion, and she'll also take some Q&A from the audience following that.
Thanks, Sarah. Thank you, Sarah. Thanks to Carly Fiorina, and thanks for everyone for being here today. My tweeting has been interrupted by a panel. If you occasionally see me, I'm not doing my homework. I'm tweeting, and you too can live tweet. This is my commercial. We're using the March for Life hashtag, spelled out for, and every life a gift. If you want to, and people who are watching at home or in their offices can do the same. I want to launch right into our panel. We have Mark Bradford, the president of the Jerome Lejeune Foundation, Dan LaHood, who co-founded both St. Joseph's House and Isaiah's Promise here in Washington, D.C., with his wife, Cubby, and Charmaine Yost, who's the president of Americans United for Life. And I want to go right straight into continuing where Carly Fiorina started us off. And Barbara, one of our questioners, Carly Fiorina was talking about this young boy, Kenneth, and you mentioned so many people's reaction when they hear stories of adverse diagnosis are, well, I wouldn't want to live like that. So they immediately think it's compassionate to end the life. Dan, can you talk a little bit about your life with people who have been allowed to live, who are facing so-called special needs, which over the weekend, I was at a forum in New York, and Tim Shriver from Special Olympics was there. And he said, you know, people come up to me all the time and they say, oh, you're such a nice man, you're doing such a kind thing. And it really frustrates him because he realizes they have no idea. You know, the gift is all his. He's not doing anything generous, is what he was trying to explain. But people don't understand that if they just look at the words adverse diagnosis and are scared. So Dan, could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, first I'd like to say something about Tim Shriver. I was channel surfing 3 Sundays ago, and I never watched the Oprah channel, but I stopped because I saw Tim on television, and I listened to him, and he talked about his experiences with the Special Olympics, and I kept thinking, this guy looks like a Kennedy but talks like Mother Teresa. How did this happen? Where did he get this? So, and in the course of the conversation, it came out he got it from his mother, Eunice. So I'm very impressed. I read his book, Fully Alive, and his recipe for that kind of happiness is well illustrated in that very fine book. But as to, I was really taken with what Mrs. DiLello said in terms of seeing the disabled as persons. This is it doesn't start out, you feel, if you encounter the disabled and you've never been around them before, I said, somehow this doesn't feel like a gift. This is something that I might be afraid of, might even be repelled by it. And we've had this experience with volunteers at St. Joseph's House. It didn't come in sort of with the sense of what was really, what's happening in the milieu, what was the story with these people who are different from me. But what happens over time, if those who are willing, they discover the humanity, just as she was saying, and there's a sort of a transformation that's awe-inspiring, like the power to persuade by somebody's presence and somebody's need, activates something in the human heart that probably I don't think can be triggered by any other experience.
Charmaine, can you just talk for a moment? I was struck when Carly Fiorina was speaking. At one point, she said, "Who are we to judge a woman?" And immediately, I could hear many people in my head. You know, the protesters who will be there outside the Supreme Court on Thursday at the March for Life, who would say, "Well, it's a mother's choice to decide to do whatever she wants when she gets an adverse diagnosis." And I know you feel similarly. I think I sort of didn't care about politics on one level when the prospect of Sarah Palin as vice president was on the scene. If the only contribution she ever made was she brought a little attention to the fact, to those numbers that Sarah mentioned, upwards of 90% in a lot of statistics of children with Down syndrome, given a Down syndrome diagnosis, are aborted. That's huge. That's something we look away from and we can't look away from. But we can't, at the same time, Charmaine, we can't seem to get past this choice and freedom language. What are your thoughts on that? Specifically on this March theme this year of every life and particularly these situations we fear the most?
Well, that's such a good question, and there's so many different elements of that I'd like to try to wrap together. Like you, I thought Carly was kind of going in one direction because we're so used to hearing people use that phrase to talk about the woman. And I think it really is important to, so many times in this conversation, we're focused on the life of the baby as we should be, and somewhere in there, there's this underlying assumption that somehow we are sparing the couple from difficulty, and actually,
and even the unborn child too, right?
Right, exactly. In fact, I'll never forget. I actually taught a class that had a module on abortion at the University of Virginia for a while, and I'll never forget this very gorgeous young co-ed one time saying to me, "Well, you know, you're basically sparing them from a life that would be so difficult," and it was so kind of. It was really bone chilling to hear those words, that eugenic mindset that is so accepted now. But the point I want to bring us back is to focus on the woman, and that experience of getting a prenatal diagnosis that is adverse, and you've been, so, you know, to lose a baby for a woman isn't that, you know, ladies, isn't that every woman's nightmare? And when it happens, it's, you know, your life is never the same again afterward. And so I think that we have this misplaced compassion in that what breaks my heart is this idea that destroying the baby before it's born is presented as a compassionate choice to the woman. And yet what we all need to understand is that the data is really clear that the aftermath of abortion after an adverse prenatal diagnosis is not good for the woman. It is not good at all. I'll never forget watching one of the most heartbreaking videos I've ever seen online that a family produced after they had a baby who died after 4 days. And they walked through what that experience was like for them, of getting the diagnosis, of being absolutely panicked, of wondering what they should do. Because frankly, it's presented as, if you are a good parent, you will spare your baby this pain. And so the abortion decision is presented within the context of compassion for you to be a good parent. And if you're in the midst of that panic situation, you don't have time to think about it, because very frequently the abortion decision is presented as something that they need to make a very quick decision about. But the alternative that is so gripping to me is what was seen in this video of this family that walked through having the baby. The community, their church, their community circled around them in support. They went through the birth, the acknowledgement of the value of that baby. And then there was a funeral. This tiny, how heartbreaking, this tiny little baby but they were giving the baby a goodbye. They had a ceremony of setting off balloons which was meaningful to them. And so every time I think of this issue, I think of those balloons and that mental image I have of that family going through a ritual that was meaningful to them. And this is the best of community. This is why we come together and live in community, is because life is hard. Life is hard. As we go through life, there's all kinds of horrible things that happen, and that's why we need each other. That's why we need community. That's why we have rituals that help us to deal, that help us to grieve, that help us to commemorate the importance of life when it comes to the ultimate end. And so that's why, as Americans United for Life, we have a piece of model legislation that we promote across the country to require hospitals to tell families about the availability of prenatal hospice and how they can access help, and so that they, because it comes down to informed choice, doesn't it? And not railroading a family into making a decision that ultimately is difficult for them in the long term.
Thank you, Charmaine. Mark, can you talk a bit about what support and empathy look like, and what parents most need from a policy point of view? We're here in Washington. The March for Life gives us this great opportunity to be focusing on this. So, concretely, what can this look like better?
Well, I think fundamentally people need good information, and good information historically hasn't been provided. In 2011, Dr. Ryan Skotko, who is a medical geneticist and co-director of the Down Syndrome Clinic at Massachusetts General Hospital, published a series of articles in which he revealed the satisfaction that families have with children who have Down syndrome, the satisfaction that parents have, the satisfaction that siblings of a child with Down syndrome have, and the level of satisfaction that the individuals living with Down syndrome themselves have about their lives. And that's the reality, at least in the case of Down syndrome, of living with that particular disability. But that story hasn't gotten out effectively, I think. What's in process now is across the states, in fact, Ohio just recently passed a law maybe 2 weeks ago, I guess, a Down syndrome prenatal education law that's intended to ensure that when women receive an adverse prenatal diagnosis or a diagnosis of Down syndrome, especially in this case, that they must be provided with fair and balanced and accurate information about the outcomes of living with a child and raising a child that has Down syndrome, including the medical, social, et cetera. We passed a similar law in Pennsylvania that was signed by our governor in just this past summer that also requires that women be provided access to peer supports to help them through that difficult situation. People say that when one has a prenatal diagnosis of a disability, there's a grieving period, a natural grieving period. You're going to experience something you hadn't anticipated when you had the excitement of a pregnancy and had the first several weeks or months, depending on when the prenatal diagnosis is delivered, of having a child. Women, families, not just women, because husbands experience similar emotions, need an opportunity to be nurtured through that process by a caring medical profession, by well-informed genetic counselors who can put them in touch with good resources, who can expose them to the humanity of individuals that are living with disabilities. A poll that was released was just published, the results of the poll were published in 2014 by Dr. Brianna Nelson-Goff, reported that 1 in 4 women had said that their medical provider was insistent that they terminate their pregnancy following a prenatal diagnosis of Down syndrome. Negative experiences outweighed positive experiences 2.5 to 1. And that's what legislation like these Down syndrome prenatal education acts are intended to do. They're intended to make sure that families get good information and they're not overwhelmed by the negative experiences and emotions that follow very naturally a surprise that comes with an unanticipated prenatal diagnosis. And just to briefly follow up on one of Charmaine's comments, Baby Center, a website that's sponsored by Johnson & Johnson, has a message board called Termination After Medical Diagnosis, I think is what the message board is called. If you want to read the heartbreak that follows a woman's decision to terminate a pregnancy following an adverse prenatal diagnosis, if you can endure it, go to Baby Center and read the stories that women report there. And they reveal the same thing that's been said here. I feel like to love my child, this is what I have to do. This is the compassionate choice I have to make. It's tearing me apart. It's ruining my marriage. I'm going through a depression. Can someone help me get through this? And women write in their support, yes, I understand. I've been through the same thing. Give it time and it will get better. Well, once the mother of a child with Down syndrome or another disability, always the mother of a child with a Down syndrome or another disability, regardless of the decision made. So that grief will reemerge, we know, repeatedly throughout the woman's lifetime as she sees another child with a similar disability or reflects on the decision that she made. It's unjust, it's unfair. When we know that families experience such a high level of satisfaction who have children with Down syndrome and other disabilities as well, to have to go through the grief of a decision that's made with bad information.
Is on the information point, is the medical piece the most important problem or the most important obstacle, or is public opinion just as equally important?
Well, we know that the medical profession are the first responders, so to speak, so they're there in that most delicate moment when the decision is given. And we hear stories from women all the time that they come in with a scheduling assistant who's ready to schedule their termination for them when the prenatal diagnosis is given. But we also have cultural attitudes that we need to work through as well. We've come a long way since the Americans with Disabilities Act was signed into law 25 years ago this year. I think we've come a long way in experiencing what life with individuals living with disabilities is like. And a great deal more of acceptance has come along with that, but we still have a long way to go. And you know, we're great often at the front end in encouraging women to have their children who are prenatally diagnosed with disabilities. But I repeatedly hear from people that we're not so great on the follow-through. After someone decides to make the right choice and have their child living with a disability, whatever again the disability might be, we need to be there to help support that family and to support the individual living with a disability, but also the family as they continue to navigate the complexities. And believe me, the legal issues and with regard to insurance, Medicaid, et cetera, are overwhelming. Someone needs to be there to help through that process as well. There's a lot of grief involved there as well in trying to wade through.
Dan, this, of course, when Charmaine was talking about families going through this isn't an academic discussion for you. You and your wife experienced a prenatal adverse diagnosis. And can you talk a bit, besides you providing a home for people who have had the opportunity to live, can you talk a little about why it is so important for, even if a parent knows the likelihood is their child is going to die within minutes, possibly of birth, why is it important to see that whole process through?
Well, a short answer would be that the parent wants to be the best parent they can be, as long as they can be. And I would like to take up on Mark's point about the medical community being the first responder. They are the first responder, and they're the ones who we heard it first when 26 years ago when my son was having a sonograph that revealed polycystic kidney disease. The sonographer turned to her and said, "Oh, you're a walking coffin." So that sort of set the tone for what we encountered in the days that followed, when families sort of, particularly her family, they're dead now. I can talk about them. I know, don't speak ill of the dead, but they were threatening. They said, "We're going to disown you," which they eventually did. They were they were opposed to the tack that we were sort of being drawn to because of advice I had particularly gotten from a priest. I had been a fallen away Catholic, but when no atheist in a foxhole, I banged on the door of a rectory, and the priest told us we were asked to do the difficult thing, and that sort of began turning the tide. But she encountered resistance from her minister. So everywhere we turned, we found resistance to what we were drawn to, and it almost dissuaded us from sticking to what we wanted to do. But by grace, because of my wife's love for our son, as soon as you find out that you're going to have a child, you love that child. I mean, you don't say, well, if he comes out with blue eyes, I'm going to turn away from him. No, you love your child, and so I firmly believe, as we found in our experience with Isaiah's promise, that what's going to change, what's going to turn this ship around, is allowing a parent's love to reveal itself with the kind of support that we've been talking about here. Given time, giving an ethical sonographer, an ethical doctor, an ethical OB, that once that sort of the big picture changes, when people say, just give us a chance here, don't smash us as soon as we find out and say, you have to do something now, thinking that that's the answer to this, because what Dr. Bradford would say, it's not the answer. The grief from these people runs through their whole life. But we found that when people are allowed to make these decisions, that they love and they heal and they become better people. And this is why Isaiah's promise is growing, because people who go through this say, I want to be a peer minister too. Look what I found. Our family's stronger, our marriage is stronger, and I want to help other people in this situation. And that to us is the key to the whole thing, allowing a parent's love to be expressed as fully as it can be.
Charmaine, how do we make this? Carly Fiorina talked about telling these stories better and more often. How do we make this more than, a couple of days we bracket off in January, and this year specifically focusing on some of these issues? How do we make this more of a pro-life thing, more of the air we breathe?
Wow, that's a really good question, Catherine. I'm sitting here thinking about the point these gentlemen are making about putting this in the context of our whole culture and how we deal with this issue as a whole, and not just thinking about this as being just about the prenatal diagnosis, and helping us to understand that it really does reflect a holistic conception of what we think our lives are about and what we expect out of life. Right now, Brittany Maynard's husband is on the cover of People magazine, so we're seeing him at the grocery store again this week. And I think these two issues...
And she, of course, is the young woman who took her life in Oregon a couple of months ago.
Mm-hmm. And I think these two issues connect in terms of where we're headed as a culture. Where do we expect to live a pain-free life? Do we have an understanding and a conception of human dignity that includes enduring pain and enduring suffering and doing it collectively together and finding ways to live a life that isn't quite so antiseptic? And so I'm trying to think if that really answers your question. It's just that as we move forward into a culture that is continually changing and kind of running at a breakneck speed into the brave new world, we as a pro-life movement have to continually challenge ourselves to keep up with that, to remember that it's not just abortion. It's that it's situated into some of these bigger questions that if we're not careful about paying attention to how I really think we are losing ground on this idea of our lives being easy, because they are getting easier and easier in so many ways, but we're never going to be able to airbrush out the suffering. And so that is really our mission, and our bigger calling as a movement is to speak into that and to help people see how it's connected. That it does make a difference what you decide at the beginning of life in terms of how we as a community fare. And I think that's the difficult story to tell people, but that's the challenge for us.
Our lives do get easier in terms of easy communication and all these luxuries and whatnot we have, but it's all the more dangerous in the sense that people feel so much more isolated. And if their doctor is telling them this is the protocol, this is what we do now, it makes it even worse. It makes people feel even more alone and make it feel so much harder. Mark, Jerome Lejeune, who is he for people who may not know, and how does his example play into all of this that we're discussing here?
Who has heard of Jerome Lejeune, other than just a minute ago, knowing that I'm with the Jerome Lejeune Foundation? Well, Jerome Lejeune was a French geneticist who discovered in 1958 that Down syndrome was caused by an extra copy of the 21st chromosome. John Langdon Down had identified Down syndrome, I think in the 1860s, as a composite of symptoms that could be put together to say this person who looks like this and has these particular challenges has something called Down syndrome. But no one knew the cause of it before Jerome Lejeune made his discovery. And so there was a lot of superstition around Down syndrome prior to his discovery in 1958. People would cross the street, for example, if they saw someone with Down syndrome coming because they were afraid it might be catching, or they thought that it was a result of a syphilis or whatever. In fact, Jerome Lejeune was placed in a lab studying venereal infections, sexually transmitted diseases, because they thought that there was a correlation between Down syndrome and STDs. But with his discovery in 1958, and then in 1968, the subsequent discovery that amniocentesis could be used for prenatal diagnosis, he realized that his discovery would lead to the termination of many children prenatally diagnosed with Down syndrome. So he committed his life as a medical doctor, as a researcher, to be a very strong advocate in favor of life and in favor of supporting those with Down syndrome. So he committed his life to medical research and really laid the ground for genetic research that's being done now to improve the lives of individuals with Down syndrome and other disabilities, and pioneered medical care for individuals with Down syndrome and other genetic intellectual disabilities as well, but always with advocacy at the core of everything that he did. He was a very close friend of John Paul II. John Paul II made him the first president of the Pontifical Academy for Life in 1993, but he died in 1994 before he could really fulfill that role. He asked to be relieved of that responsibility, and John Paul II said, "No, you're the man." So he did it anyway. So his cause, actually, for anyone who's a Roman Catholic, his cause for canonization is moving forward now in Rome. He was known as a very good and holy man, and so that's being recognized by the Church as they investigate his cause for canonization now.
Scientists can be good and holy men too.
Scientists can be good and holy men, and you know, he's a fabulous example of that. For anyone that cares to know a little bit more about his life, his daughter, Clara Gaimard, wrote a book called Life is a Blessing. It's a little biographical memoir of their family and the life of Jerome Lejeune. It's an easy and really delightful read.
Dan, being in the shadows of Capitol Hill, roughly speaking, you're in Silver Spring, right?
Yes.
But so close to Washington. What do you wish people in Washington would take into account about the work you do, about the lives you see every day, and also what kind of help do you need? What do the people you serve need most, and how can other people help?
The families who have been diagnosed with a poor prenatal diagnosis, they need friendship, they need understanding, they need maybe sympathy is not the right word. Let's just say compassion. They need to be recognized as being human beings who have made a choice based upon the human dignity they find in their experience of their child. From the outsider, it may seem somewhat limited, their experience, but it can't be denied because we've seen the power of this love in the healing that they've undergone after choosing to carry their child to birth. Frequently death, sometimes not. What do they need in terms of Washington? It's really a good question. I would say that mentioning John Paul II, that I think the only way that this is really going to change is through a sort of a radical adherence to a personalism that involves the person with a disability. Can I tell a quick story that sort of illustrates this in our very small experience? You mentioned Silver Spring. When we moved into our house that we're in now, there was a man up the street, two doors up on the left up the hill named Harold. And when we first moved in, we were always out in the yard. It was the summer, and the kids were having water battles, wheelchair, wiffle ball with volunteers and our children, that sort of thing. And he sat up on his porch and he looked down at us. He had a perfect perch to sort of observe us from up the hill. And he'd look at us, and I said, what is that man thinking? He comes out every day and watches us. One day, Harold walks down the hill, and he leans over our fence, and he said, you know, Hitler had the right idea about these kids. And I was like, okay, well.
That is not what I expected you to say.
No, I know, that's not what I expected. I expected sort of a NIMBY sort of response. These kids really belong here. No. But no, it was different from that. So we did it. I asked my neighbor, I said, you know, what's up with this, with Harold guy? He said, well, he's a salty old bird. He flew bombers in the Second World War, B-17s over Germany. So I was trying to wrap my head around the irony of that situation. He was bombing Nazis, okay. So some time goes by, and Harold's still up on his porch watching us. And after a month or so, he came down, and he leaned over the fence. He says, I have a bicycle in my backyard, and I think this little boy would really like to ride on it. And he'd come back every day, and he said, I found a traffic cone, and I think if you put it out here at the end of the street, that the kid could ride his bike and be safe. And I thought, wow, just the power of witness, right. The power of experiencing those as human beings who laugh, who cry, who fall out of their wheelchair and laugh, who fall out of their wheelchair and cry. It's not magic. It's a movement of grace. It's a movement of what the human heart wants most is to love.
I love, this is so not a Washington thing. Basically, when I give Dan the opportunity to say, and our website for donations is, he says, no, what people need is friendship. That is the hard choice, the hard way, right?
That's the coin of the realm, it really is. It's what changes things, and that's how things move about in that world.
Well, on that note, we have a couple of minutes, so I just want to give the opportunity for a question or two.
Hi, my name is Melissa Ortiz, and I think I can do this without getting emotional, but thank you for speaking truth. I have a lifelong disability, and I'm here to tell you people, my life rocks. I have the best life of anybody I know. I also have one of the hardest lives of anybody I know. But God knew exactly what he was doing when he allowed this, because my friend Jack is sitting over there, and he can tell you I'm a rabble-rouser. And the first thing, I'm so proud of everything that you guys have said, and the short version of my story is that they found out my mother was pregnant when she was about 4 months pregnant. She had been exposed to glue and pesticide fumes. My parents were not believers. They were agnostics. And the doctor said to them, you're going to die if you carry this pregnancy any further, because she was very, very ill. And the apple didn't fall very far from the tree. I come from very stubborn parents who looked at the doctor and said, no, thank you. We'll take this as long as we can. At the end of the 7th month, they took me, not thinking that either one of us would live through the cesarean. And lo and behold, my mother will be 83 very soon, and have a great life. I'm not going to tell you how old I am yet. But I just want to say thank you. And how can we as a community of people with disabilities help you guys tell our stories? We need to, and I want to challenge anybody that's with a disability listening by web. I don't see anybody else in the room besides me in a chair, but I want to challenge us to tell our stories and to tell them with dignity as opposed to pity striking. We need to tell them with dignity. How can we help you, though, as a community of people with disabilities to further our cause rather than, and further our mission, not even a cause, our mission to be fully included in a way that doesn't produce off-putting, there's too much anger, and that comes out of frustration, and I get that, so.
My quick response is be yourself and you'll be included, and that's true for anybody. If it's a child, take them where you would take any other child, ball game, movie. Just don't think of them as, think of them as being so different that people will immediately categorize them as not people, because they will once they're in a situation where the person is integrated and they're loved. That's what I would say. Yeah.
That's what I needed to hear you say. I knew that, but I needed to hear
it. And I think your point that a hard life is not a bad life is such an important point. As others have been saying, you know, we're so focused on fixing every possible problem that we can. New research has just come out in Great Britain. They've discovered a way to slice into a gene and replace bad genes and fix, you know, and this follows along with the 3-parent embryos to get rid of mitochondrial disease and, you know, on and on and on. Good grief, you know, we're not into manufacturing humans, we're into being human. And I think being human involves sorrow. The full range and spectrum of the human experience needs to be articulated clearly in the disability community as well as everywhere else, because we've gotten so far away from what it means to be human and accepting of that.
Yes.
I thought of Kristen Hawkins from Students for Life, who, when she takes in summer interns and young people, the first thing she tells them is, don't be weird. Like, don't act like this is some obscure issue, and just don't be weird about, just be human. That's exactly it.
Yes.
Yes, in the back.
Kami Bhatt, and I'm with the Pakistani Spectator. And my question is, would you support pro-life position among Muslim with the perspective that the children who are born within family who have some like mental illness issues like schizophrenia, those children are the best candidate for Muslim mullah who want to make them suicidal, you know, entity. Exactly. And I have personal example. One of my nephew in Pakistan, in Islamabad, I think his father has bipolar or schizophrenic. And I was visiting Pakistan last year, and he met me, and his first question was if I believe Shia are Muslim. And I was so afraid to socialize with him anymore because I thought next time he might have bomb with him, you know, if I tell him something that he doesn't like. Thanks.
Sure.
There are so many layers of that, but obviously, again, focusing on every life as a gift and making people look at, in the this conference I was at this weekend where I ran into Tim Shriver was about seeing the human face, just actually looking at people and seeing them as people before you even start a discussion, so that we can actually have a conversation with people of the left who actually might have common ground here, right? If we actually start talking about people rather than war on women and, you know, all our rhetoric. And I think that's at the heart of it. I mean, so much of our culture commodifies human life. Maybe one other quick question over here, and then we can wrap up.
Hi, Erica Anderson from Heritage. So my question is, I think one of the hardest aspects of this is you know, it's talking to women that, you know, and encouraging them, like, you know, to go through the pregnancy. But what about women that decide they'd rather go for adoption? And I think that's the most heartbreaking to me when I'm looking online and you see a lot of children with disabilities that are just not adoptable many times. And so I guess I'm just wondering, is there a resource for that? Is there anything being done on that side of things?
Well, there are agencies that specialize in disability adoptions, and I know that there are waiting lists for some children with disabilities, among some of these groups anyway. It was an incredible story just here in Washington a year and a half ago of there's a priest, Father Vanderwoody is his name, I don't remember his first name, but he had apparently was counseling a couple who had received a prenatal diagnosis of Down syndrome, and they were going to abort, and he convinced them not to. The husband, or a partner, I'm not sure if they were married, said that he would agree to allow her to have the child if they could find an adoptive parent. Well, they could have had 500 adoptive parents by the end of the day. I put it up on our Facebook page, and I was still getting calls 7:30, 8 o'clock in the evening of families who were willing to adopt the child. One adorable woman on the phone, I'd love to have the child. I guess I have to talk to my husband first just to make sure it's okay, but we'll take him, no question. We're happy to take the child. So it's not a problem. There are agencies that specialize in disability adoption, and I think they're probably, in this country, I don't know how many children will be unadoptable. Really,
the kids we encounter at Isaiah's Promise, I would say 95% of them die within a few weeks of life. So, so the parents have made the commitment, and they take care of their child until the end of their life, and they've been the best parent they could. We don't see a lot of kids that survive or run into many parents that seek adoption. It's our situation.
Eric, I used to work on the adoption issue, and it was really frustrating to me because I really do believe that every child is adoptable, but it starts to become complex when you dig into the systemic issues in the foster care system, et cetera. And unfortunately, frankly, this is a little bit of an indictment on our side of the aisle, is we don't do enough work as conservatives on that issue.
Yeah, I do a lot of reading on foster care and adoption, and that's where
Yeah.
I also think, I mean, there are lots of layers to this issue, but this is another issue, the adoption issue, where the religious freedom issue that we talk about is not just an academic issue or a rhetorical talking point or whatnot. I mean, how many religious agencies have had to get out of the adoption business because of the left forcing the issue? I think I agree with Charmaine. We have to do a better job of talking about this issue, because then it becomes more believable to people, frankly, that there's a religious freedom issue when, you know, a Catholic Charities has to get out of the adoption business or whatnot. But I do think it would be an excellent thing, like unexpected diagnoses and supporting parents is an under the radar issue in a lot of ways. I think adoption as much, if not even more so. And maybe we can make a commitment in the next year to make that a focus as well, of the March for Life and things. Well, I wish we could talk for another hour or more, but for now, thank you to the panel. Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Charmaine. And thank you, everyone, for coming. And thanks to Carly Fiorina, who had to get to another event. Thank you. And on behalf of the National Review Institute, I want to thank especially Sarah Torrey and the Heritage Foundation for co-hosting this. And of course, we can't do it without the venue, among other things. But thanks again.